Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about autism for 1.5 hours. I'm Carolien Rieffe. I'm in developmental psychology. I don't like the sound either. I don't know what to do about that. Maybe I move it a bit down. Is this better? Well, let's try. And I do a lot of research on autism for, I think, 25 years. I'm also very open for questions, debate. So if you do have any issues you want to discuss, please raise your hand. And of course, I also want to keep my program, but it's nice to have interaction and see what you know already or how you think about autism. Who has experience with autism, like a friend, yourself, family, working with autistic people, any kind of experience? Is there anyone here that has experience? One, few? Yeah? Okay, good. So also for you, if you have questions or if you have comments and you think, oh, I think differently, let's discuss that. Right? The aim of this discussion, you can read the textbook, so that's not the problem. The aim of this lecture now here today is that you think about autism in a different way, maybe from the textbook, or broaden up your ideas about it. The lecture is going to be quite different actually from the textbook, but I'll discuss that. Okay. Oh, here we're going to talk about what is autism, autism acceptance, diagnosis versus dimension. These are 4 criteria: social functioning, and special emphasis on women or females with autism. Oh, I want them all, not one by one. So these people, what do they have in common? Anyone? You know who they are, eh? Van Gogh, Newton, Bill Gates, Greta Thunberg, and Eminem. What do they have in common? Anyone? None of you? You all had your coffee? Someone in the back? Is the question so difficult? Oh, is there a hand? Oh, yeah, please shout, because I don't see you always with your hands raised. Yeah. They're all autistic. That's what's assumed. So not all of them might have a diagnosis, but the idea is that all these people have autism. So looking at these people, where these people, when you read the chapter in your textbook, I assume you did, or when you go and read it, but when you hear about autism, did these people cross your mind? No, they didn't. Exactly. So this is also why I say the lecture today, it's going to be a bit different from the textbook. Because I want you to think of autism in a different way, not just as a problematic thing as it is portrayed in the textbook. Because we see many people with autism functioning really well in society, and even their autistic features very often might benefit them. Right? But we don't think that, and those people don't end up in the textbook. So how come? The question is, when do you get a diagnosis? You do get a diagnosis of autism when there are certain difficulties. When there's no difficulties, you won't get the diagnosis. So you have to realize that many people that you read about, the ones with the diagnosis, they had a different life path than many other people who never got a diagnosis, but maybe also would qualify if they would get diagnosed. So you do get a diagnosis when you don't have a fit with the environment in which you live. And of course, when there's the facilities. I could imagine for Eminem never being to health professionals, seeing the background where he's from. All right, so he doesn't have an official diagnosis, but it's assumed. But for many others, they might fit perfectly well within their environment and they won't need a diagnosis. So this is something you need to consider, right? That people you meet on a daily basis might have autism, yes or no. It's an invisible thing. It's different from being deaf, where you can see the hearing aids, for example. This is something invisible, like all the other, like ADHD, all the other forms of neurodiversity, as we say. You also very often don't get a diagnosis. Many people don't get a diagnosis when they're really good in camouflaging. So they might be autistic, but they don't get a diagnosis because they adapt constantly to the not autistic, to the non-autistic world. We call it allistic. And so they seem to function well. We'll talk about that later. You do get a diagnosis when your parents think, oh, there's a problem, things don't go well, you don't fit in with your peer group, you don't have friends in school, or you don't want to go to school at all anymore, you dropped out, or later in life, relationships that don't work. So when there's problems in daily functioning, people look for professional help, and they might get the diagnosis of autism. And when there's psychological suffering, right? So that doesn't necessarily have to be. You can have autism or be autistic and no psychological suffering. In this context, we talk about neurodiversity. That autism is a form of neurodiversity like ADHD. And that's why I also call it autism all the time, and I don't say autism spectrum disorder, as they say in the book. We don't think these days anymore. Many of us think it's a disorder. It's a form of neurodiversity. It's being different. Why a diagnosis? Because very often there's comorbidity. So we see in autistic people more often they have problems in the mental health domain. Very often, especially the ones who can camouflage really well, get a diagnosis of depression or anxiety. So we see more often internalizing problems. This is, of course, the misfit with the environment. They report more often feeling lonely or ostracized. You know the word ostracized, being excluded? Yeah? So you come, there's a peer group, and you come, and they kind of, very, very subtle, kind of give you the shoulder, we should say. Very often, they more often have social problems, and they drop out from school. If you don't have all these problems, then you don't get a diagnosis, then you're fine. You function well, okay? So think about it. What we learn about in the textbooks is only the ones that don't fit well within their society, within the social context. Then autism, it's often, I think Evelien in the former lectures already discussed this. You can look at any form of psychopathology or diagnosis, or in this case, the neurodiversity as either a diagnosis or a dimension. So you have the medical model, yes or no, you have autism, and there's a certain cutoff point, or you can say, look, there's a degree of features that you can have. And then it's a continuum from no features at all to the maximum features. So to have this different perspective that I'm presenting here is not just me. That's really also the perspective from the autism community. For example, in the Netherlands, we have the NVA, the Nederlandse Vereniging voor Autisme, and many other organizations similar in the UK or in the US. And more, all these organizations have been changed. When I started this research in 1996 or so, I think you weren't even born, most of you. That's when I started doing research on autism. We thought very differently. And I also saw it as autism spectrum disorder. And this has been changed globally. And globally, April now is what was called Autism Awareness Month, and now it's called, lately, the last couple of years, Autism Acceptance Month. And to create acceptance and validation for autistic people. Another thing, I don't think there's a slide on it, so to see it as a form of neurodiversity, is whether to say autistic people or people with autism. In Dutch, that's both. Mensen met autisme, autistische mensen. And the NVA had a whole debate on their annual conference 2 or 3 years ago, and different people were sitting on the stage in a panel discussion and discussed why they preferred one or the other. So in Dutch, when I publish now these days in Dutch, I use both terms. I use autistic people and people with autism, or children with autism and autistic children. When I write in English, now these days, it's autistic first, so it's autistic children only. And in these language issues, I follow the community. It's not my decision. So if you look through my papers, my publications since 1996, I think my first publication then came out in 1998 or something. The language then is what the autistic community wanted at the time. So the title of that paper and how we refer to autistic people is what they wanted. And I remember, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, then it changed to people on the autistic spectrum. What was it? People with autistic spectrum disorder. Well, something like that. Anyway, so now these things changed. And they change anywhere, right? Like in the queer community, labeling changes. And for me, I think also that's what I want to stress here, follow the community, because those are the people we are talking about and talking with, and they should be respected, I think, and they have the lead. Okay, so let's talk about the book. I'm going to discuss first now what's in the book, what do you need to know about autism from the clinical perspective, and we talk a bit more about social functioning and women later, females specifically. So it's very strange to see every year again this chapter 12 where they put autism and schizophrenia in one chapter. And so I'll explain to you why that is, and Evelyn next week will do half a lecture on childhood schizophrenia. But psychosis is the core feature of schizophrenia. And that means that you have ideas about reality that don't fit with other people's ideas about reality. So when I give that lecture, I say, maybe I see now like one Dutch cow walking down the stairs here, but you can't see it, but for me the cow is real. It's like being in a dream. Yeah, you know it's real and it's not. And we can find psychosis in the literature really for so long. So even before Christ, in scripts, textbooks, or texts we have, hallucinations or delusions are described. And sometimes they make different interpretations, right? If I'm Catholic and I see Maria, then it becomes a secret place, a sacred place for pilgrims, right? And whereas if I'm not Catholic, I think it's a hallucination. So there's different interpretations. But this already was there for such a long time. And only in childhood, this was diagnosed as childhood schizophrenia in 1930. And then in 1943, there were two people, Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. Around the same time, 1943, they published both, independent from one another, they published about autism. And Leo Kanner then did introduce the word autism. And it was linked to psychosis at the time. And it was thought that people with autism also very frequently had psychosis. That's not anymore. And so this is when the whole concept of autism first appears in the literature as such. And now we know from research that psychosis and schizophrenia really is a very different area and has nothing to do with autistic people or this form of neurodiversity. So anyway, from that tradition, chapter 12 still combines two topics in one chapter, although it's separate sections. But it's a bit of a strange connection. Good for you to know. Another difference, which is important, I'm not sure if Evelyn is going to talk about that next week. A psychosis comes and goes. Autism not. Autism is there and stays, right? It's a form of neurodiversity. So it's not something that you acquire and then, oh, you get the right treatment and then you're cured. No, it's who you are. It's your identity. And it's always difficult for me that it's always talked about as a form of neurodiversity, also because there's no identifiable neurological basis for it, but we know it's a different way of processing that we know. There's a certain oversensitivity, like this sound that my microphone is making might be really annoying and overstimulating a person with autism, or the airco or the light might be too much, too bright. So the oversensitivity certainly is a neurological feature. But the funny part is the diagnosis, if people get a diagnosis, it's based on behavior. It's not based on these features, it's based on behavior. Any questions or comments so far? No? You really have to wave, otherwise I won't see you. Okay, so when I started to do this research, then the literature says, oh, about 1 in 1,000 people have autism. Now, these days, we think about 5% of the population, so that's 5 in 100. Maybe a bit less, some say 4 or 3, but around that. So that really changed a lot. So there's a huge increase in diagnosis of autistic people. Anyone? Why? Why do you think? I mean, there's many reasons for that, but what would be a possible reason for that?
We've started accepting more the dimensional approach, right? So we try to see it more in the spectrum, and so we don't just go to the extreme cases and diagnose people that are on the extreme. Like an autistic person who decides, okay, I'm not going to speak, for instance, and then to see that more.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. You've read about it, or you have experienced, or you know a little more about it?
I had a friend that was autistic.
Until 2. Okay, so I repeat your answer for the recording and for the other students. Pity you didn't have the microphone. She formulated it really perfectly. I hope I can repeat it that well now. Correct me. So you said we thought we were thinking differently now about autism, whereas in the past, the extreme cases were diagnosed with autism. And I want to add to that yes, I think we think more. So you said we think more now as a broader spectrum. So also people who camouflage really well are now diagnosed with autism, whereas before, indeed, they would be diagnosed with anxiety maybe. Also, the awareness increased. So I think those two factors together, that people now, 25 years ago, maybe clinical psychologists who were doing the diagnosis didn't even think about autism. And now there's so much more awareness about it, and it's so much more in daily life thinking that also, I think, increases. But in combination with what you're saying, it's not just the nonverbal, very extreme autistic people that make no contact or have repetitive behaviors. We'll talk about that later. But it's also the more people here in the lecture hall that you don't see from the outside. And also you can have nice conversations with the person. So you wouldn't think about autism, but there will be features, of course, and the camouflage may be high. And you said you learned so much now because you had a friend with autism, and she was only diagnosed 2 months ago.
No, I only figured out that she had autism.
Oh, you only figured out
after
some...
knowing her, because I did notice some signals, but I did not know a lot about autism, so I couldn't really pinpoint it to this issue. And then she explained it to me, and I was like, oh, a lot of
Yeah. Okay. So let me see. Let me know if you recognize here in this lecture. Okay. So you didn't know. Okay. Another thing. When I started this research on autism and even publications in 2005, I think I have. It was always 1 in 10 boys and girls. So 10 boys, 1 girl. Very often we didn't even include the girls in our analysis. We deleted them because there were so few that statistically I couldn't say anything meaningful about the girls. So we just deleted them. So again, more girls these days have been diagnosed. And for the same reason I think that the students just mentioned. Right, so there's more awareness and we think differently now about autism and how it looks like, the phenotype. And the rate increased enormously, especially female autism now much more often is diagnosed. Okay. Some background information just for you to know when you read, because if you're gonna study autism or you wanna know more about it, or when you read the textbook, certain terms will be used or concepts will be used and you might not be familiar with them. So you need to know them even though we might not use them now anymore, but they will be in all our publications, also publications for me from 20 years ago. So in the DSM-4, there were different categories of autism. And then the first one, autism, is what we then at the time called the Connor autistic person, like the person that was very often nonverbal, or you could not have a conversation with the person, even if the person was verbal. Very socially aloof. Then the Asperger disorder was for autistic people who were much more communicative. Also had the other features that come in the next slide, but they were much more communicative, so you felt you could talk to them. And then the PDD-NOS was the group that did fulfill some criteria, but not enough to get the diagnosis. And then it would be PDD-NOS, a lighter version, kind of. So that's how to interpret these findings. The criteria for the diagnosis have been changed also from DSM-4 to DSM-5. In the DSM-5, these 3 categories are gone. They don't exist anymore. So if you read about Connor autism or Asperger, that's really before DSM-5. What they do have in common is atypical behaviors. And compared to the, if you take the allistic world, the non-autistic world as the norm, that is, of course. And then in the DSM-4, you have communication impaired and socially impaired. And in the DSM-5, that's now combined into one category because they're both interrelated. You can't distinguish them really. And it's impaired social communication. And of course, it's funny because I notice I also change every year in my thinking. I work so much with autistic people. We have autistic researchers in our team. I am only almost on a daily basis in direct communication with autistic, like the NVA organizations, about our research and what we're doing. So all these impaired social communication is, of course, from the perspective of the non-autistic community, right? Because the autistic people think their communication is fine. Just they follow different rules. And that's why very often autistic people can communicate well with one another, but it's with the non-autistic they can't. Yeah, okay, let me give an example here. I don't know where I wanted to give this example, but I always give this example somewhere in this lecture. And it's I like this one myself so much. But it also explains maybe the way of communication might be very different, but very productive and good and adaptive for autistic people. Okay, so I lived and worked at London, at UCL, for several years, until 2004 I came here at the university there. And one of my colleagues, Richard Cowan, we always went for lunch. And he did other research on cognitive development. I did research on emotional development and autism. And we always went for lunch, got our sandwich, went to Russell Square Park next to the university building and chatted. Then one day, for the fun of it, we filled out an online questionnaire on autism. And, well, and it was about male-female features, and it was like autistic, if you got into the autistic domain or not. Both of us got in the autistic domain, very high. I got so high that, yeah, it's very, I think I didn't, well, never mind, that doesn't matter. I got so high that it even said, oh, there's no females on this domain, where I got scored in the diagram. Well, thank you. Anyway, so I could imagine Richard being autistic or scoring high on autistic features, but never being diagnosed. And he did pretty well with his research and everything, being an academic professor. And, but then we got to talk about it, and Richard said, yeah, you always have these social talk, small talk. So when we go for the sandwich, then the women there, where you paid for your sandwich, they knew that I just got married there, and they would say, oh, how's your hubby? Or I knew that they went on a holiday, and I said, oh, how was it in Italy? So now Richard and I were going to practice. I was going to teach Richard, based on his scores, I was going to teach him small talk. So Richard then tried small talk with these women and said, how was your holiday? And then it stopped. Anyway, so I'm back in Amsterdam for the summer holiday. I come back at the institute in London, and my phone rings on my desk. And I pick up and I say, yeah, Carolien. Yeah, it's Richard. Okay. He says, yeah, I was in Italy for the holidays with my family, and we did this, and we ate pizza the first day, and then the second day we went there, and we ate some pasta, something. I remember he mentioned the food. I was like, okay. And then he was finished, and we hung up. And then my phone rang again. So I got the phone again. And we're good friends, Richard and I. We really like our lunches together. So I pick up the phone again. Yes, Richard again. I say, yeah, Richard. He says, well, Carolien, I forgot to ask you, how was your holiday? So I'm saying, well, but Richard, do you really care? And he says, no, not really. So I say, you know what, I'll tell you over lunch. And he says, okay. And we both hang up. I didn't feel like talking to him about my days like he did it as an obligation to me. And of course, over lunch, we completely forgot about it. And he never asked me again. And we just had our normal talk, what we liked about statistics or some philosophical debate or our research or, you know, emotions. It's a philosophical topic. We always had debates. So we just had back to our normal routine. No more chatting about our holidays, that kind of nonsense. So that's why I'm raising this now here, because this impaired social communication, yeah, if you think of it from a certain perspective, right? But within the autistic domain, people understand each other really well. And they're fine. They won't have this small talk. Anyway, the textbook. Back to the textbook. Because I have to teach you about the textbook. And then, of course, there's what I think I should teach you about reality and autism and how you meet every day and how you should deal with it, being later on maybe clinical psychologist. And in daily life anyway, because you're going to meet autistic people one way or the other. Okay, so the atypical behaviors, as it's called. So behaviors typical for autistic people. And this is also, I think this also addresses a bit the response of the student, who said only children more extreme, on the extreme, with very atypical behaviors that the non-autistic world doesn't really understand or thinks it's awkward. Those are seen. Those are, you know, parents think, what is this? Or other people will think, what is this? So, for example, I was in a swimming pool with an autistic boy as his supervisor, and he was so excited to go on the slide. Is that the slide? Yeah, to go or jumping thing to get into the water. And he was lining up. There was a queue of children, and he was so excited. And he got on his toes and he started flapping, and he had this high-pitched voice, like. Ee! And this can be very typical, but that's for overexcitement for many autistic children. And I remember there being very protective, looking at the other children. I thought the first one who gives him a dirty look. I was so happy that he was just being himself and being so excited and expressed that. So I remember there standing as like a pit bull, watching his environment. I wasn't his parent. I was just there to go with him to the swimming pool. But being so protective, I thought, oh, I want him to enjoy this. So the first one who's going to do something, I don't know what I was going to do. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. They got scared already just by the face of me, I think. Anyway, another thing very important for autistic people is holding on to routines, having a same routine, because it calms you down. It very often, working with autistic people a lot, you very often see also the high-functioning people that when you meet them, you wouldn't think these people have autism. Very often they are focused on something, and then any distraction is already kind of overstimulation. So changing a topic to something else, or just saying, oh, that noise in the back, might already be a distraction from the main topic and difficult to process. So it's really a very strong focus. That's why, for example, companies like IBM, but also mathematics departments, have people, IBM hired software developers only autistic. So they had a whole group of autistic people because they can have a hyper focus on what they're doing. And we also had autistic researcher in a lab for a while, a student who came to help us out with video coding. And he says, oh, I can't do it for long. And whereas everyone else, the non-autistic students, they could do the video coding for 1 hour and then they lost concentration. He came in at 10 and at 4 o'clock he was still doing it. And I thought, what do you mean you can't do it for long? You're crazy. So 5 hours on the road just focusing on coding videos. That was amazing. Right? So there's again, you see there's specific advantages or disadvantages, but depending on the situation. So this hyperfocus means that you can talk about the topic of interest that we're dealing with now, but don't change. But when you are on that one topic and focused, it's amazing. Then the autistic person knows everything and out-argues you on everything, like I have. I don't know if you know. I've put the link online in the lecture for today also, an interview on loneliness in high school with Elijah Delsink. Now, Elijah Delsink in the Netherlands is the famous autistic person. I should have added him here in a photo. Why did I bring him now? Oh, because I work with him a lot, and he's got this really strong hyperfocus. And then he will know anything on the topic that we're working on. He will know all the details. He argues a lot with the Dutch government. He will know all the meetings that they have. He will know all the details and all the minutes that were put online, the debates in the parliament. He knows every detail. So every meeting we have with the Minister of Education or the staff, Elijah out-argues anyone. I just follow Elijah because I know whatever he says, he knows. Okay. Another thing is avoiding eye contact. We don't see that in the first year. So very young babies don't, but that comes later in development. Avoiding the eye contact. And most likely the assumption is also that it's giving too much information. If I look you in the eyes, no, the student, yeah, you. It makes you feel uncomfortable. I think also for autistic people, also for non-autistic people. When I sit with you and have a coffee, and when we chat, we don't look each other in the eyes all the time. So anyway, autistic people, you see them looking more away. When I was in that summer holiday camp with that autistic boy that I took to the swimming pool, most of these children in that summer holiday camp then didn't make eye contact, and they would really. Mine didn't either, would always look away, and yeah, some really more obviously would look into space when talking to you. So you need to know, because they might be talking to you and you won't realize if you're not autistic. Okay, I think I've got all the... I'll text Elijah in the break that I mentioned him. He said, shall I come? Then they can see a real autistic person, he said, to come here to the lectures. I said, maybe online, we can do that another time. Anyway, communication. I think we already talked a lot about communication. Okay, so this is what you will read in the textbook, but I think, again, that's really based on the old ideas of autism and not doing right to how we think about autism now and all the people that get diagnoses now. And as the student mentioned, many much more verbally adaptive people that also now get diagnosed with autism. So that 30% never develops language, it's in the book, but I don't think that's true. You also have to realize books get updated every 10 years or so, right? So it's always a bit behind what we think now, the researchers. Autistic children or people can repeat what you say. That can be a feature of autism. So they can repeat what you say. Right? So let's get a sandwich, let's get a sandwich. You get that back. And again, I think it's to structure and organize thoughts. Pronoun reversal, some people with autism won't say I. But this is really the textbook. But, well, and there are, of course, also, there are many non-verbal autistic people. It's there. It's not that it's not exist. What's really nice, what I really like about Instagram, I follow many, for example, parents with non-autistic children on Instagram who post. So that way, through Instagram, which didn't exist 20 years ago, but it's like you can see their daily life and how it is to deal with a non-verbal autistic child. So if you want, I can add a slide with some Instagram accounts. I didn't think of that now. Which are nice to give you a better understanding. And then also you see how the parent deals with the child, interacts with the child, and how that works out. So it also helps me a lot to get a better feeling of what it is to be like. Oh yeah, no understanding of social pragmatics. And this also adds to what here says atypical nonverbal. Oh no, that's another thing, the nonverbal communication. The social pragmatics is that people with autism take literally what you say. So if I would say with an ironic tone, oh, what a nice dress. People with autism will think you say, most likely, not all of them, but most likely will think, okay, you like the dress. Whereas non-autistic people might hear the irony in my voice. But there's also many sayings, like take a seat. I think I have a lot here, because I never know them here. Break a leg, night falls, time flies, piece of cake. Right? You should not take these literally. That's difficult especially for autistic children, that's difficult. I would never use these phrases with autistic people. So that's also, I realize, I would just never do it. I would never talk that way. Just say what I want. That's the good thing, eh? You can just say what you want. You can just say what you think. For an autistic person, that's very clear. And that's exactly how they will respond. So if you want to know if the dress or the shirt or whatever you just bought or your haircut is nice, looks nice, ask an autistic person. If you want a socially adaptive answer, ask an holistic person. They will say, nice, right? But the autistic person will tell you. So, you choose. You need to, yeah. Okay, a little bit more. I can talk for hours. Are there any questions? Any comments? Does this change a bit your perception on autism as far as you had it? You can just nod. You can also not know, eh? That's also fine. Yeah? Now, it's nice for me to see the yes nodding, of course. Okay, you're so silent. I'm used to have more interaction. Maybe after the break, get your coffee and talk. Because also, when you have questions, okay, one thing, questions. In the break, don't come to me with questions, okay? Because it's also my break. If you have a question, do it now. Realize when you do have a question, for all the other students, many others will have the same question or a similar question. So you're helping the others out. But also, it's nice because usually with a question, I get into another stream of thoughts. I think, oh yeah, that's also important to tell, or maybe I don't agree, or maybe yes. So it's nice. It's also nice for me. So you get a better lecture asking questions, basically. So, yes?
I wanted to ask if, so when they don't understand, like, metaphors, like, oh, time flies, or specific, so they don't, but if it comes to
Okay, so the student here asked, good question, and I'm not sure if I know the answer, but we can think about it. That's science, we always develop research. The student asked, so time flies or break a leg, is it because they didn't expect it in that context, but autistic people can understand poetry? Or is it none of it, right? So what I would say, but I would check this now within the autistic community because I'm not sure, but what the textbook would say, what we think as researchers, but I've never checked this with an autistic person, is indeed that it's taken literally. And so then I would assume that poetry would be really difficult for autistic people. So it's really the words you're saying are taken, it's unidimensional. Your communication. There's no extra layers to it. That's why it's so nice. That's why I said if you want to know something for real, ask an autistic person because you get one answer, like what that person thinks. There's no, oh, let's be nice, let's smoothen things up. None of that. Yeah? But I'll check. I'll check with Elijah. Yeah, it's not used in literature anymore now. If I would publish now on high cognitive autistic people, then any editor of any journal will say, no, we don't use high cognitive anymore. But still, it's in the literature, and you need to understand also the literature. So when I started, we made a differentiation between low cognitive and high cognitively able autistic people. And we used a cutoff score of 80, of an IQ test of 80. So all children always are tested, and when it's below 80, they're not included if you want to study high-functioning autistic people, and if you want to study low, then it's the other side. Anyway, it's of course especially the highly intelligent. Oh, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to give an answer to the question.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm autistic.
Good.
And I don't.
Now I have to repeat this for the recording. Maybe you can come in the break and repeat it in the microphone. Would you want to do that? Because we need a break anyway. Can you repeat very quickly for the recording, for the students? Because it's time for a break. And thank you very much for your response. And I hope this lecture is welcoming for everyone, including you. Okay, so you have a break, and the students hopefully will repeat this shortly. Thanks for reaching out.
No worries. Okay, so.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah, right. I know.
It's going to be awkward because now everyone can hear me. Oh no. Okay. So the question that was asked was, what makes it hard for autistic people to understand things that aren't literal? And the answer I gave was that autistic people have a tendency to have like a first impulse of understanding everything literally because that's how they tend to communicate. And when someone says something that isn't literal, there is a moment where they're like, their first impulse is to think, oh, it's literal. And then sometimes, depending on context, they might pick up on, oh, hey, this person is saying this thing in a different way than I would do it, and they probably mean something else or whatever. But especially autistic people who struggle with theory of mind might struggle with the fact that they can't really picture what it would be like to want to communicate something in a non-literal way. And then even when you explain to them, oh, hey, when I say break a leg, I'm not literally meaning to break a leg, they might get really confused because they're like, there are so many other ways you could say that. Why would you say it in that way? I don't like it. I don't want to communicate in this way. I don't want to think about it in this way. And so for some autistic people who are able to adapt and understand these things a little bit better than other autistic people, they might still pick up on what's going on, but there'll still be that first impulse to think of things in a literal way. And then after they realize, oh, hey, wait, that's probably not what they mean, they might think, okay, maybe they mean something else. Whereas for other autistic people who maybe struggle with that a little bit more, they'll just get stuck in that literal understanding and might even just completely disconnect from the social interaction because they just kind of refuse to engage with this other way of thinking.
Okay, so what you can notice in autistic people, that you won't immediately think they are autistic for the non-autistic community. So verbally, very able. Very often, the way of talking has no strong intonation. So a very stable tone of speaking. As I said before, a very strong focus on a certain topic, and then knowing every detail of it. Outperforming holistic people by far. Very often trying to follow social rules. So basically you see very often autistic people actually are very law obedient. We see in research, for example, that autistic people follow peers in online behavior. It's a published research. They follow their peers in online behavior, liking someone else, but not in the disliking, so putting someone down. And of course, that's a social rule. You shouldn't do that, right? You should be nice to one another, not diminish a person or in public, or blame someone in public. And we see it in other research as well, that for example, we have a study on fairness, which is an inborn capacity that humans have. I don't know if you know that little experiment by Frans de Waal, biologist, and he studies primates. Go and Google it if you don't know it. It's so funny to watch it. It's two monkeys sitting next to each other, and they both get like cucumber. When they do something, they push a handle or something, and then they get a piece of cucumber, and they can see each other. And so it pushes the handle, gets cucumber, something like that. Watch it. But then one of the two pushes the handle, and he gets an extra nice thing, like a grape. Now the second chimpanzee, I think, or bonobo, pushes the handle and gets the cucumber. You know it? And he's with the cucumber, and he doesn't want a cucumber. So he smashes it or he throws it out. He wants the grape. So whereas with that same action, previously he was fine with the cucumber, now having witnessed his peer getting something else for the same action, he wants that reward too, right? So it's an inborn capacity also humans have for fairness. We want things to be fair and equal. Now, also here we've studied this in autistic people, and you see these rules are very strong. They are stronger in autistic people more often than in holistic people. So they really want to follow and do the right thing. What is learned, this is the right thing to do. Another one is responding with their own story, and it's funny. So imagine you broke up with your partner and you're completely devastated, and you tell this to your autistic friends and about the heartbroken, the loss, whatever. Well, you know how it is. I guess everyone has experienced one day or the other. And that person now responds, oh yes, I also have been heartbroken. I also had a relationship, and starts telling about his or their own story. Now for holistic people, this appears like, oh, I'm not interesting enough. We were talking about me, now you changed the subject. But when you hear autistic people, they say, no, I'm trying to show you that I understand what you're saying. I'm mirroring you to show you my interest, or that I'm listening. Right? So you see, in the textbook, it's written as if there's a lack of interest or it's all atypical, but it really depends on what mindset you come from. Do you argue from an autistic perspective and capacities, or do you argue from an holistic perspective or capacities, right? And both can be validated. And a lack of reciprocity. Yeah, and that's I think the story with Richard. He wasn't interested in his telling me his holiday either. He just did it because he thought that's what should be done. But anyway, not that bonding, and I think that has to do with staying on the topic. Anyway, so what you see in young children, because that's of course you're here in the course developmental psychopathology, what you can see in young children. So this is what you see typically in holistic children. But you will lack this more often. Of course, it's never yes and no completely. It's not 100% or zero, but it's more and less. You will see this much less, this kind of social responding I'm showing. This is my own son, João, when he was very little, because it's easiest. I always know photos that fit the whatever story I want to share. Or I have a photo and I think, oh, that's nice for a lecture, because it pinpoints exactly. Anyway, so here you see mutual interest between a friend of mine and João in the glasses that this friend is wearing. So they have shared interest and they're interacting with one another. I will give some explanation about the photos, because I understand there's also visually impaired a student, and I did not include these photos in the PowerPoint. So here you see an adult man and a little boy, and they're both holding the glasses of the man, the adult man. Here you see me in my younger years, when João was just 6 months old, and I'm holding him on one arm. 6 months, he's only 6 weeks here. And it's funny because this is, I didn't know, but I read it later in the literature, that this is the normal distance that many people hold their child, I think 30 centimeters, because then the baby can see you. So his vision, my son João, at the time wasn't developed well yet. I read in the books, I didn't know. But this you could see. Anyway, we're smiling to one another. Right, so that's connecting, that bonding. And that's what you hear from parents when their child gets diagnosed later in life with autism, and they think back and they say, oh, we did not have those mimicry in facial expressions and that kind of bonding. You smile, you don't get a smile back. And of course you can understand for an holistic person that feels very strange. Now, I have to say also that very often, I think 1 in 10, if the child has autism, one of the parents also has autism. So then I assume there's no mismatch in facial expressions. But for an holistic person, that feels awkward if you smile and you don't get a smile back. You see, the whole textbook is written from the holistic perspective. Yeah? Anyway, this is my friend Miriam holding João, sitting on her lap, and he's like 8 months old here, and they're both reading a book together. So they're both holding the book, actually, and it's this joint attention for a common interest in a topic, all social sharing. Now, this photo, I only realized it when I saw the photo. I had no clue that João would do this. So I'm sitting here at the beach, Brighton. I was working here. Isn't that nice? But I did bring João. So we went to the beach and we had with Nicola Yule, I remember, professor at Brighton University, Sussex University in Brighton. So we went to the beach. I took João with me on this work trip. And we're chatting here about research. And I'm sitting, and João's sitting in between my legs. And I have my right hand with my index finger pointed. I'm holding my leg and my index finger is pointed down. Now, João is obviously studying me. He's having his breath in his mouth. He's sitting in between me and he's trying to copy my behavior. And also his index finger is like a bit like a gun, pointed like a gun. Right? And I had no clue, so only because Nicola took this photo, and then later on, bless you, and then later on, I noticed, and then I saw many photos of João mimicking, and this is what you will miss most likely or more often in autistic children. So this modeling of other people's behavior. This is with my father, and I have a set of photos, like 5 or 6 or 7, and my father sits differently on these photos. His legs crossed one side, his legs the other side, and all the time, and his one hand on his leg, his other hand on his leg. Oh, João and my father are sitting here together next to each other on a chair on a boat. And João is like 3 or 4 years old. My father is like 80 or something here. And on all the photos, I'm showing one here, where you see, again, João is mimicking my father. He's too small to cross his legs. He can't do that yet. But my father has his legs crossed, João doesn't. But you see also on all the photos that he will have the same posture as my father with his hands and so on. And the last one, now you got the picture, but I think they're so funny, sorry. I'm dwelling on a little bit here. And also because I explained the photos more in detail now than I otherwise do. So here João and I were walking at a gas station on our way to Italy, holidays this time. On our way to Italy, and we walk synchronized. You see us from the back walking into the gas station, and we are exactly synchronized in our movement. And I have many of these photos. Now, this is typical behavior for autistic children, much less typical behavior for autistic children. So these are kind of giveaways, I would say. So this is what parents see retrospectively. Very often in the first year, parents, because in the first year, it appears children with autism, autistic children do make eye contact. But later on, they will say, oh, I miss that reciprocal behavior. I miss that bonding, like smiling and smiling back, shared attention. We see also in our research, I think that comes later, we see not shared attention only for an autistic child, only when it's his or her, their specific topic of interest. Now, I wrote here typically textbook. You need to know this. So what do they say in the textbook? Oversensitivity, other characteristics of autistic people, low intelligence, often they say. I disagree now, I think it won't hold anymore. Problems in their theory of mind and a focus on the details. So we do this very quickly, also because I think the other part is nicer to talk about than this. And I assume you already had theory of mind in another lecture, did you? Hear about theory of mind in another lecture? Never? Yeah, you did? Good. You didn't? Or you don't remember? Oh, you did. Okay, good. So I can do that quickly. And this is very often observed in autistic children, that they feel standard theory of mind tasks in which you have to understand other people's minds. But then, of course, it's all those extra layers, right, that come in. So theory of mind consists of intentions, desires, and beliefs. I did my PhD on theory of mind. And I have to say, I finished in 1998, my PhD. And I got into the area of autism because that was so well done. Simon Baron-Cohen in 1995 wrote a book about, this is the core deficit of autistic people. They're mind blind. So they can't understand other people's minds. And I didn't agree, already then. I never agree. So if you want to become a scientist, I think that's a core feature. Don't agree with common sense. No, not with common sense, with mainstream ideas. Anyway, so we did some, in several occasions, we tested autistic children for several reasons. And we see, indeed, that they less often follow shared attention or the intentions of the experimenter. Okay, I'll just skip this. You can read the slide, I think. And then the classical theory of mind task, I assume you already had that. So you have the Sally Ann task that's very often used with autistic children, where one child has an airplane, and then he puts the airplane in a bicycle, and then he walks away. The girl gets the airplane and puts it under the bushes. So now the boy comes back, and then the child is asked, where does the boy think the airplane is? So the boy has a false belief because the boy had put his plane in the bicycle, bakfiets, whatever that is in English, carrier bike. But now, without him witnessing it, the girl moved it. So then this is very often too complicated for whatever reasons in autistic people. But I think it more has to do with the grammarly structure of the language and everything. We did many tests. I had my very first PhD that I supervised. We designed all kinds of theory of mind tasks that autistic people did perfectly well. But then it was for them interesting to do it. And it was in their own benefit to do it, for example. And then they were focused and they could perfectly do it. So if you're interested, look at the publications by Sander Begeer. Okay, central coherence. Typically, if you would ask an allistic person, what do you see? The allistic person would say, this is used very often in diagnostic settings. The allistic person will say car accident. And typically, an autistic child will say, I see a yellow car, I see a red car, I see smoke, I see people sitting in those cars. One tire is flat, something like that. But not the overall picture. And you get the same. So if you have the IQ test, the block design within the WISC, autistic children score very high on that. They're very good because they see all the details. And they're not, so you can see that as an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on what you want, right? If you want the overall story and the overall concepts or structure, yeah, then maybe the autistic person is not the right person to ask, but the autistic person will remember every detail that was on that picture with the two cars. Typically, yeah? I'm not saying 100%, again, it's more or less. So, but you can also say here, for the block design, this is Tangram, but it's similar to block design in the WISC, that a allistic person gets distracted by the overall picture, seeing a person sitting here, whereas the autistic person will see the individual parts and not get distracted by typically, yeah? I'm not saying, again, this applies to all or none, but more often. And indeed, if you do compare scores, that the autistic children score much higher on this particular part on the IQ test. Okay, so we get a bit more into the social aspect of it. Why is this slide built up like that? A lot of research from what we've done is what you see is that autistic people have less friendships, more problems with relationships, with all kinds of relationships. Most likely, especially in the allistic community, with the allistic people. And you could say for various reasons, autistic people have fewer opportunities for social learning, right? Because it's more concentrated on a certain topic, easily overstimulated and closing down, not wanting other information. So, for example, a playground where allistic children might oversee and learn and interact and argue and make up and whatever, and and overhear other conversations, that might be way too much for an autistic child to be at. And it might be overstimulating. So where the allistic children learn social skills and build up whatever kind of competences, very often autistic children can't sit there or stay there or want to be separated or in a calmer environment. So this gives fewer opportunities for social learning. So when we look at autistic people, autistic adolescents, children and adolescents, very often they mention they feel less connected with their non-autistic, allistic peers. They have fewer interactions with their peers. They participate in fewer social interactions. So now I'm addressing mainly the school environment where children will be noticed when they don't function well. Also the highest rates of the children not going to school at all anymore or much less frequently, so the dropouts, referring to school attendance, the estimate is that 60% of these children are autistic. So that really means that the environment in the school is not fit for autistic children. And they won't go to school, they sit at home, missing out on all kinds of opportunities. So you see, now it becomes also a kind of repetitive circle, or a self-fulfilling prophecy. No, how do you say that? Well, whatever. A visual circle. Because you're easily overstimulated, you don't want to be in that environment, it's all too much. You stay home and then you miss out on all these opportunities to learn how to make interpretations and these social cues. But this is also what autistic children prefer, to have solitary play or in a calm environment, maybe with another child, not in a noisy, very busy environment. Very often also that's overlooked. So autistic or not autistic, it doesn't matter. You have to go out there to that playground and sit there as long as the break takes. Right? So you can imagine it's very, it's stressful for autistic children to be forced in an environment like that.
I think it also our speaker was also this autistic kid. He was really high on the spectrum. We at first thought he was nonverbal. And she was like, so he didn't respond, but she, and I don't know if you know the light. All the lines stayed blind.
I need to cut you short. It's interesting, and I try to repeat it. So the student is saying there was this nonverbal, right? Or non-responding autistic child, and you're talking high school now?
Yeah.
In high school, so pupil, student, being all by himself, right? But then one day the teacher heard he was doing a role play by himself, and the teacher gave him a leaflet for the theater group in the school. And this particular young man, a boy, joined the theater group, and you said it was the best performance ever. So he really blossomed there, and he remembered the lines very well and gave a great performance there. So yes, there's more stories like this. So you see how important it is to facilitate not just the allistic children, but also the autistic children in a way that they can find something that's good for them, that strengthens their interests, their capacities, that's fitting for their capacities and their needs. So it's a nice example. Very often in the literature you will see, and I don't know if the book says that too, but then don't agree, please, with me. Very often it's said in the literature, autistic people, it's a lack of social motivation. They want to be alone. They don't want to be with other people. So it's fine if this child is alone. But is it maybe a negative choice? Because if you're met by others, by the allistic children in your class only with negative attitudes, being ostracized, maybe it's best to be alone, not because that's what you want, but because you don't want to face that negative attitudes, that negative energy day in, day out. What we do see in self-reports of autistic children, adolescents in school, is that they score higher on loneliness. So this really undermines the idea that autistic people want to be alone. Then they wouldn't feel lonely, right? Then you'd be happy to be by yourself, but they're not. How much time do I have? I have so much to say. Okay. What we see in our own research is that, and I'll talk, if you come next year to CCAP, Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, I'll have a special lecture now devoted to this and the environment, and that's next week Tuesday, but it's for third-year students. I'll talk about this research in detail. So we see from based on our research that the autistic children in a class that we in school, elementary school, that we examined, that they don't want to have many interactions, but they do want to feel part of the group. And they're there. They don't go and sit somewhere else. They're there with the group, but they don't need that daily interaction. When you read that interview with Elijah, the link I've posted on the web lecture for today, or on that on Brightspace, I think also somewhere in that interview he will say that. He says, oh, if I go to school in the morning and someone says hi, then my social battery is already good. That's enough. Because it implies, if someone says hi to you, that you're welcome. That if you want to interact with someone, or if you need something and you want to ask someone a question, where's the next lecture, or what book did we have to read for today, that you will be met with friendliness, with kindness, and that other students are happy you're there. Okay, we do see from research a lot that very often children with autism in elementary school and high school, this is not just our research, but research all over the place, they get bullied much more often. It's not that they bully themselves more often, but they get bullied more often. So there's different kinds of bullying. One is, and I think I actually mentioned it already a lot, because one is physical, that's very obvious, and we all know that's wrong. Then there's the instrumental, stealing or damaging something from someone. And there's the verbal, shouting out names and so on. But I think the most common, I guess, that many autistic children meet on a daily basis, and we now have a PhD actually in my team studying this, that's relational aggression. And that's what I already mentioned, being ostracized, being socially excluded, never being invited to a birthday party, and always being picked last for the school teams. And it's very subtle, and you have actually nothing to say. You can't go to the teacher, you can't go to your parents and say, oh, I've been bullied, as you can with the other forms of bullying. You can when you're kicked, right? And that's obvious. Especially if someone took a photo, which we now have with the mobiles, then you can show, right? We see this in autistic children. We also see it in, I want to give an example of a group of one deaf child in a hearing group of children. And these are the sweetest girls ever. It's in Portugal. They have the sweetest dresses, and they're singing in a group. It's like a whatever sweet film, right? And now this deaf child walks in the video at the playground. So she looks as sweet as all the other girls, and they're in a circle and singing something, whatever. And now the girl with the cochlear implant, she wants to enter the group, and all of a sudden they all go with their arms around, and she's excluded. She can't enter. And it's so subtle. We have many videos like that. And it's so subtle, and you can't tell anyone. There's no harm done. Right, so Charlotte Hu in my team, we're doing now a PhD research she's doing on 4 years, what we call a microaggression. Because this is a kind of form of daily microaggression that not only autistic people, many other people meet on a daily basis. Being different makes you open to daily aggression, microaggression. The problem with this is that you internalize it. There must be something wrong with me. All the others are playing so nice. What's wrong with me? And then the school, oh, you have no friends. Oh, let's get a social skills training. Right? Or for autistic children, oh, let's do an ABA. We're going to make you normal. Applied behavioral therapy. ABA, behavioral, well, I forgot the name. Who knows? I forgot now the abbreviation. It's a form of therapy. Right? So it's all focused on the child. You know what? We're going to make you fit into your environment. So then you will have friends. Well, you can already understand from what I've been lecturing so far about being different and neurodiversity. Of course, you're never going to be as an holistic child. You're never going to meet those standards. The deaf child can never put out the cochlear implant and be hearing like the other children. Right? So it's an impossible aim that you wouldn't want. You shouldn't want them. But this is very often put on the children. And then it becomes even worse. So you were already ostracized, right? You were already excluded for no reason that you can't pinpoint. You thought something's wrong with you. Now they're doing all this effort to make you fit and still you have no friends. Now you're really hopeless. That's the message. So in our lab, in our research, we approach things differently. We think every child should be celebrated as he or she is. I saw this child in the middle didn't show up on the slides I put online. So please draw for the visually impaired person this. I hope someone can help, and this circle with the happy child, hopefully, in the middle. Because that's what we should start with. Respect the child as he or she is, neurodiverse, or any other kind of diversity. And we should focus on the environment, the social environment, the built environment, and the cultural environment. And where's Moxen? There you are. So Moxen just joined our team now from Architecture Delft to study how we can change the built environment from an architectural point of view to make it autism friendly. And we think with an autism-friendly environment, Moxen, we can you create a form of diversity in your environment, so that will be adaptive for many other people, for different kinds of diversity. Oh, yeah, 10 minutes. Girls are coming up, females. Okay, so we also did a focus group with autistic adolescents in high school and asked them how their high school experience was or is. Some of them still were in high school, others already dropped out. Already Sunday nights, some of them mentioned they had stomach pain. You can read all this research from our website. You can download the papers, it's all there. You see, I'm going a bit beyond the textbook, but I think it's important. That's why we do this research, right? So many of them Sunday night already had stress. Some of them had stomach aches Sunday night. Just the idea to have to go to school the next day. Just that. So imagine 6 years of high school torture. That's why many drop out. None of them, in our focus group, none of them, this is mainstream education, none of them had a friend in school. Shocking. And I think, oh my God, if that would be my son, Joao, having to go to school each day in, day out, to such a nightmare location, I wouldn't want them. But what they also mention, how do we get to the door safely? That no one's hitting me, that I don't get a ball on my head, or how do I know that no one's touching me? The hallways are too crowded, too noisy. I can't get to my locker. I think many of you remember your high school period just a couple of years ago. You recognize all this, right? The canteen's too busy, can't sit there, too noisy. Imagine an autistic person in a canteen with such poor acoustics. So when we have lunch with the autistic researcher in our team, my team doesn't go and sit in the restaurant here. They go and find a quiet place in the building where they can have lunch. Because for the autistic person, that's a no-go, that restaurant here. Once we sat there, I asked her, I said, don't you get crazy here? She said, I just sit it out. I said, woof, we go. And they never sat there again. So what you see there, we need to take care of our environment. Yeah, you got to clinical developmental psychopathology, but this, I think, is the basis for a lot of thinking about all these issues. Same for ADHD, for many other concepts that you've been discussing over the last couple of weeks. Okay, I need to move on to the girls. So basically, social inclusion or equity here, I say, and I think we should not force autistic children that they have to play with other children, which is social inclusion. Oh, you have to go and play, and then you're good. But we should see what are the needs and capacities for these people. What is it they want? So we should watch out for victim blaming. And I'm saying here equity means equal rights, but not that you want the same thing when you go to school in the morning. Okay. We go on. What about girls? Otherwise my time is up. So I already said that it really changed a lot. It's okay. I've discussed this already, why it changed. When I started doing this research, it was 10 to 1, 10 boys to 1 girl. And now it's 4 to 1, or even 3 to 1, I think Els Blijt, with whom I do research, told me. So a lot might have to do with socialization. Very often girls are very good in camouflaging. And when you look at the statistics here, at what age, so these are the ones, the children and adolescents and adults up to 17 years old, when they got their diagnosis. And you see boys, the blue to the left, they get their diagnosis in the first years, but many girls only during adolescence, and many women only when they're 40 or 50 years old. And that comes with a lot of problems, because then very often they already had the diagnosis. Maybe it's another slide later, but I want to share it now, because very often they go through a lifelong psychiatric path that has never been helpful. They get the diagnosis of depression, they get a diagnosis of anxiety, whatever kind of diagnosis. But the underlying neurodiversity of autism is not recognized and acknowledged. So if you don't understand that, then dealing with the depression won't help, right? Won't fit. So I speak to women who are 40 or 50 and then got diagnosed, and they say, I went through how do you say that in English, een rouwproces of mourning, a process of mourning. Then I remember so clearly this woman, I was giving a lecture, she was in the audience, and she said, if I had known when I was 10 or 12, my life, and if I then would have had the diagnosis, my life would have been so different. And now she's been fighting all her life, being different, never being able to pinpoint why and how, getting all these other comorbid diagnoses, and things were never solved. And then now she got this diagnosis of autism and things fell into place. And she understood herself. Also, she became, forget the slide. I'll get to the slides. Also, she felt, now this is my identity. She became part of an autistic community where it's okay to be autistic instead of you're the strange one. So where you're fine being autistic. And you can discuss the difficulties you face day in, day out with other autistic people in the holistic, dominant, holistic world. Okay, let's see what's on the slides. It's always, when I get a bit stressed about the time, I just talk. But you can read the slides at your own pace at home, right? It's all there. So girls are very good at socializing. And they are, in general, more verbal. Reacts really nice. They will have more this, oh, how was your holiday thing? That both Richard and I don't like. And they have a different way of building up relationships. So I'm talking typical peers, the typical males, typical females. And of course, there's the whole broad range there of diversity as well. And very, very often, girls that don't make eye contact, they're diagnosed as socially anxious. Oh, she's shy, instead of autistic. Okay, I skipped this one. So I think because I talked about this woman who was 40 or 50 when she got her diagnosis, is that harmful, yes or no? So also I talk to parents that then say, oh, but we don't need a diagnosis. So is it helpful? Do we need a diagnosis, yes or no? Why would you want that? So without the diagnosis, very often you don't develop the autistic identity, right? And you keep trying to compensate and camouflage, be like the holistic ones. And that's very exhausting. So whereas an holistic person goes to a birthday party or whatever, ADE, how do you say it in English? It's coming up, that major dance event in Amsterdam is coming up. I live next to it, or in some of those places. I mean, where others go and really energize themselves and being social with others, and they come home and they're so happy. For an autistic person, going to a birthday party, having to socialize, having to make those conversations, it's exhausting. And I wrote a paper on friendship with an autistic woman, and she says, oh, my friends know. Sometimes I just want three weeks maybe, no contact with them at all, or months. But they can respect that. I want to be out of it then. It's enough. Okay, confusion about identity. So if you live in a holistic world, you would qualify as autistic, but you don't have the diagnosis. You constantly think, oh, I should be like them. Unless you self-diagnose, of course, and think, okay, I'm fine, I'm autistic. I didn't get the official diagnosis, but I choose my own path. So then you already go through that process of identification. Okay, other diagnosis very often and other treatment. I think I just stop here. Okay, some advantages of autism as a final slide, I think. Honesty, strong feelings for justice, good memory, hyperfocus, creative, and no bias. So like what I showed, the Tangram thing, they can see exactly the facts and are much less biased than holistic people. Okay, if you want to know more about the research we do, we have Focus on Emotions. We also now have here are some Instagram accounts. Not the woman, the mother with the nonverbal girl, is not on it. But anyway, you can always text me. Yeah, and on focusonemotions.nl you can see the research we do and the publications I've been talking about. Thank you for your attention, and hope to see you in the other course next year.